Hello and welcome back to Changing Channels, part of our GI Live series of digital events, which runs from a couple of weeks ago all the way until the middle of September. We're a bit sorry for starting 10 minutes late. We're having some minor technical difficulties, but we're up and running now. My name is Chris. I run Gamesindustry.biz, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session on how subscriptions have changed entertainment. Subs have had a massive impact on film, TV, and music for quite a while now, with Spotify, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and the billions of others that are out there at the moment. And now subs are starting to take hold in video games with PlayStation Now, but particularly Xbox Game Pass, which has over 10 million subscribers. To chat about the impact of subs and what the games industry might expect, we have some really smart panelists joining us today. And here they are. We have Jenny Priestley from TVB Europe, Carol Severin from Media Research, and Robert Price from 20th Century Fox. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey. Before we actually kick things off, I thought it'd be good if way to sort of start things off is to introduce yourselves and explain a bit about what you do and your expertise. Perhaps starting with Jenny.
Thanks. Throw me in at the deep end. Hello, I'm Jenny Priestley. I'm the editor of TVBEurope.com. And magazine. We are a B2B publication that is read by people that work in the media tech side of the broadcasting and entertainment industry. So I spend a lot of my time writing about streaming services, as well as linear TV, technology such as the cloud and IP. We are available, free to read. So if you want to see what's happening in the world of TV and entertainment, we're your best source of news.
Carol?
Hi, thanks for having me again, Chris. My name is Carol Severin. I am a co-founder and a senior analyst at Media Research, and we're essentially an entertainment, market, consumer, and strategy insight company. And we cover games, video, TV, sports, and music, so right across entertainment. And we support companies of all sizes, from startups through global multinationals right up to the tech majors, in helping them navigate the opportunities and pitfalls as entertainment is intertwining ever more so.
Robert?
Hi, yeah, so just to correct you, I'm no longer at 20th Century Fox, not least because 20th Century Fox no longer exists.
Yeah.
I was at 20th Century Fox for nearly 10 years running the home entertainment division, so very much impacted by the rise of streaming. I'm now chairman of multiple companies, including Fourth Wall Creative, the influencer marketing agency that specialises in video games influencer campaigns.
Well, excellent. Well, this topic is about how subscriptions have changed entertainment. So why don't we start with the big question? I mean, how have subscriptions changed? Perhaps how consumers are consuming media. Are they open to new types of content? Are they Are they more likely to give up on stuff a lot quicker now? I mean, Carol, why don't you start us with that? How have consumers changed?
Yeah, sure. So to me, and there are many changes, but the overarching sort of umbrella to me, a key change is the rise of multitasking. Especially with younger audiences, where we are seeing consumers now playing a game while running a FaceTime with their mates, chatting, and binge watching Netflix on a laptop on the side. And so binge consumption is obviously kind of common in gaming. Engaging for long sessions with games is nothing new, but the fact that this rose in video now kind of poses a little bit of a competitive pressure. So it's something that gaming can accommodate for or compete for. Ultimately, you can't really push against that behavior much. At the moment, it's going to be either taking away engagement or, more importantly, attention. So but games are actually really well positioned to start accommodating for that multitasking, and actually, arguably, probably better positioned than music or certain video services, because some of the games like Fortnite are showing us that a game doesn't have to just be the game, but it can actually be a whole entertainment venue in itself. So multitasking is absolutely one that's going to disrupt, or that is disrupting the sort of status quo. And within that, binge watching, I would say, is something that games will need to consider going forward.
Well, what about you, Robert? I mean, you've seen this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer to all of your questions is yes. I mean, I think where you've seen global streaming platforms build audiences of well over 400 million, maybe higher than that from latest data. And you've seen a huge change in how people consume video and film and TV content. There's more content than ever before. I mean, you know, as a viewer of content, you've got more choice than you've ever had. And we're all used to that endless choice. You know, I believe that Netflix has over 2 million minutes of content. I think that would take you 4 years non-stop viewing to watch. So I think, yes, it's changed everything. It's certainly changed the industry, the content production industry. And I think people do, to answer your question about whether people tend to flick through content, I think it's natural that we do. And that's despite the fact that we all take about 10 minutes to choose what to watch. But we decide relatively quickly whether we want to carry on watching or not. And I think a final point for me, which we saw a lot when I was at Fox, was it changed viewers' perception of what new is. So the film and TV industry built itself a very successful business model based on exclusive windowing of content. And effectively what streaming has done now is take that away because there's so much new content. The value of new has changed, that perception has changed. And I think that's something that may be interesting for games publishers to think about as time goes on, that whole ability that streaming gives of people trying different things very quickly, moving around, and that whole perception of new changing.
What way is new changed? I mean, is it...
Well, in film, for instance, obviously you had a system that operated before where films were exclusively at the cinema, and then they were ready for home entertainment. Then would be pay TV, and then be free TV. Some variations of that, but of course, now you've seen that change because streaming has changed it. There's new content there all the time, so people don't necessarily see the value of waiting for content. They want to get it straight away, and I think that process has certainly been accelerated with the pandemic because obviously cinemas have been closed, so major studios have decided to release directly to digital, and in Disney's case, on their streaming service, Disney Plus.
Jenny, do you have anything to?
Well, was thinking about what you were saying around grabbing the viewer straight away, and I think that there is definitely a change there because as a viewer, if I'm watching linear TV, you know, traditional broadcast television, if a brand new series doesn't grab me on that first episode, I'm not going to go back to it. I will forget when it's on, and I won't go back. But the streaming service lets me go back to it. If I sort of think, well, you know what, maybe I should give it a second try, and I don't have to remember when that episode's on because it's always available to me on whichever streaming service I'm watching. So I think, in a way, you know, having that content that's available at whenever I want to watch it, it might be while I'm travelling into work, well, in normal times, or, you know, late at night if I can't sleep or whatever, then I know that content is still there and available for me to go back and maybe give it another go.
By the way, if anyone watching on YouTube wants to ask any questions to the panelists, please do put them in the YouTube chat. We have someone monitoring it, and they will relay those questions to me. Let's talk about it from the production side then, or that side of things. Is there stuff that's being made now that wouldn't ever have been made without subscriptions, or are there stuff now that isn't being made because of subscription services? Has that brought about a change in that, Robert?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wouldn't say never been made, but more access to more of it. I think that incredible demand for content and also the financial muscle that the global platforms have to buy productions means that, yeah, there has been a broader sweep of content made. I think, you can look at the massive success that, for instance, Netflix have had with documentaries, which has been a real success for them. I think the speed at which multi-series drama gets released through streaming platforms has been, up until the pandemic has stopped production, has been impressive to see. So they can build, they see a set of programming working, they can build on it very, very quickly. I think the other thing is, as these platforms become truly global, you're seeing more foreign language content. I think that might be a growing trend as well in terms of viewing going forwards. So I think, yeah, I mean, this is all of these factors have been obviously turbocharged by the pandemic as people watch more and more.
If I may follow up on this one, I think from the from looking at the macro view, well, yes, more content is being made in general, so that's a yes to the first part of the question. But for the second part is the stuff that's getting made somehow different these days? I think there has been a really big shift in what's defined as sort of mainstream programming. in the sort of traditional TV world, you would have the stuff that would have to appeal and be good enough for a really wide pool of audiences, right? So you would have your sort of CSI on primetime or whatever, and the real goal is to make sure that a large enough group of people liked it enough to stay watching. Right now, it's the niche that's the new mainstream. Right now, the sort of strategy goes more about super serving and making sure that you might have a smaller pool of an audience in a country that loves the show, and then you try to go globally and actually make a mass audience out of these niches, right? So what that kind of means is that you kind of had to do less risky stuff in the traditional TV model, right? So to that point, right now there may be something that is, you know, that everybody's going to be okay with, but then you might have the sort of really polarized TV shows that some people love and some people hate. And I think that is quite a big change that has happened in the types of stuff that's being commissioned now. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
That hasn't stopped the major platforms obviously investing heavily in established talent, though. So there's that mainstream element is still there, and that's where you're seeing a lot of content production inflation, trying to grab the finite resource that is talent.
I would argue as well. I mean, look at things like co-productions that the streaming services and traditional TV are doing now. So a prime example, and please excuse this pun, is Good Omens, which was, you know, made as a co-production between Amazon Prime and the BBC here in the UK. And so, you know, the UK put so much money into it, Amazon put so much money into it, and they've both been able to release that to the world. And I think that's the way that a lot of the big broadcasters are now sort of starting to engage with the streamers in order to build their content. I think it's also interesting to see that the streamers themselves are starting to move towards more traditional, if you could call it, TV content. So, for example, again, maybe somebody like Netflix, who would buy in from the BBC or Channel 4, The Great British Bake Off, or, you know, MasterChef, has now tried doing its own reality shows. And I know there's there's a couple of foodie ones, but they did this recently, the Big British Garden Fight or something. I think it was hosted by Vic Reeves. Now, they've not given us, they don't really give us viewing figures, but they've definitely not given us viewing figures like that for that. And I would be really interested to see how that hit with viewers, or streamers, I should call them, I suppose, these days. But yeah, I think that the streaming services are actually helping push the production values as well for the traditional content. You know, I know we always say without HBO and Game of Thrones, we probably wouldn't be getting what's going to be, and I'm looking forward to it, Lord of the Rings, which Amazon has just, you know, spent $250 million to buy the rights to. We wouldn't have had that without HBO, you know, without a traditional broadcaster. But then the fact that they're willing to spend that, how do the traditional broadcasters now keep up? The only way they can keep up is doing co-prods.
Well, one of the things I have noticed has changed is that TV shows aren't living quite as long. Well, at least it seems that way. Netflix, there's the joke that Netflix series all has 3 years in it and then it's over. And I guess is that, why is that? Is the other days of getting to 100 episodes so we can syndicate, or in the US can syndicate, is that over now, or why are Netflix so quick to cancel things?
Well, they've got access to incredible data and analytics, which obviously they don't share, but they can see what's happening with viewership of their shows in detail that's never been seen before. I think they're making the decisions purely based on that. I think you may see longer running dramas and shows in the future. I think it's natural if you hit on content goldmine that people still want to watch, they'll carry on making them. I think it's a pure mathematical thing. If they're not getting the viewers, they stop them. Or obviously it's a creative decision by the talent who are making it that those stories or whatever run their arc. So I don't think there's any rule. And it's interesting to me that, for instance, in the past, Netflix had a brilliant, they use Friends, for instance, as a show that built their subscriber base quickly around the world, and that's an incredibly long-running show. So I don't think any of these platforms are in any way against long-running shows. I think it's purely analytics and data that drives that decision-making.
I would tend to definitely agree with that, and just maybe add that I think it's also a little bit part of just the unit economics, right? So you are building the shows with sort of slightly shorter shelf life. You know, if you have a season and you are really successful in season one and really successful in season two, and the talent starts becoming a little more demanding, the budget starts becoming a little bigger, etc. It's essentially there is a risk that your margin can go down. And so actually, there may be an optimal point and at which the margin is essentially the best. And that may be season 4, even though the plot hasn't been resolved until season 7. And so to me, there is essentially an incentive to kill shows in their prime, because otherwise they become too expensive to keep to keep feeding the velocity game, so to speak. And so last thing I was going to say is that it's different with the traditional TV networks, on the other hand, because they are advertiser centric, right? They need to keep the advertisers happy, and the advertisers might say, well, I want to reach the audience of Friends or Walking Dead or what have you. And so for you as a TV network, the most straightforward way to do that is another season of that show. Instead of trying to say, yeah, but we've got all of these other shows that are upcoming and they will have very similar audiences. Netflix can do that because they, to Robert's point about their data as well.
I think another prime example of that actually is The Crown. When Netflix first announced that series, I think they said 7 series they wanted to do. Then back at the beginning of the year, they announced they were just doing 5 because Peter Morgan felt that he could tell the story more over 5 seasons. And then suddenly a couple of weeks ago, they went, no, actually, we've changed our mind. We're doing 6 now. So, the lucky thing for a streamer, I suppose, is that they can have that flexibility. They can decide mid-show that they want to do more episodes or maybe even do fewer, because they feel that they can still tell that story and release it, and they've not got to do 20 odd episodes that a US broadcast network would have to do. They can do it in fewer or more, however they want to do it. They're not regulated by those, we must fill this half-hour programming this half-hour programming every week for 24 weeks.
Absolutely. I was going to say one last thing. I think this is actually an opportunity for games, bringing it back a little bit, because let's say you're going to break with a season 1 and season 2 pass of a popular game. To make the season 3 pass doesn't need to get more expensive for a game. A games developer, yes, might require a little more salary, but it's not going to be the same jump that a talent actor or an actress will require. And so actually, maybe there is an opportunity here for games to sustain longer shelf lives of the assets they are going to be driving into their subscription services.
We've had some questions in the chat, actually, and there's an interesting one which I didn't think of asking beforehand, is professional critics. Bird Box was panned, but it was watched by 100 million people in a month. How relevant are professional critics to what is or isn't successful on a subscriptions platform?
Well, look at Game of Thrones. So that final season of Game of Thrones, massively criticised by the critics and some of the fans, still had massive viewing figures. Never believe the critics. They panned It's a Wonderful Life. It found an audience, and now it's a classic.
Yeah, it's a bit like music critics, isn't it? They're still there, but with streaming, people are just taking choices all the time by recommendation or by discovery. But, some music reviews are interesting, and the same applies to video content too. I think games might be different because obviously the technicality of games is more profound. So I think critics of games will be much more relevant for much longer, I believe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you guys. And maybe actually, not sure if this is something many critics would want to hear, but maybe actually a lot of the effect that critics are driving today is that the critique websites are actually baked into the algorithms, the recommendation algorithms. So maybe, something like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb, well, not quite IMDb, Amazon obviously, but one of these critique websites, maybe sort of plugged in and drive 0.5% of the recommendation algorithm score and it will be a part of 100 other recommendation sites that will drive some sort of score. So to me,
I think there's a need for
sorry, go ahead.
Discovery as well, because there's so much content. So people do need help on discovery. I thought it was interesting. Relatively recently, Netflix have gone with a chart mechanic on their landing page. I think that plays to the point that discovery is slightly problematic, and people do like things like charts.
Yeah.
And I think there is a need there, a bigger need actually, to help with discovery. And if I was a producer in video, I'd want to get my show discovered, obviously, because I want to get more commissions. So there are challenges there.
I mean, I'm swamped with choice. Like, I've never had more choice of entertainment. I don't even know why I bother subscribing to any other subscription service, because it's not like I'm ever going to complete Netflix or anything like that. But I actually utilize not so always reviews, but peer reviews, peer opinions, all different types of things to try and decide whether or not something's worth my time. I often give up. Yeah, I've often given up on series when the second series is, first 5 episodes are quite slow. I'm like, wow, I'm out then. I'm not going to endure. I'm not going to sit through almost 5 hours of TV before it gets good. I don't have that time in my life at the moment. So I think, my view is it has a role, but then, like everything, it's complicated. Well, I mean, we've got loads of questions in the chat, but I'm going to move on to one of my own. We've also seen like a number of long cancelled TV shows or films sort of be resurrected via Disney Plus or Netflix or Amazon Prime. Has that been effective in bringing in new audiences?
I would say until somebody commissions The West Wing again, no.
I think, as I said earlier, Netflix particularly built its audience base initially based on long-standing IP, like Friends, and I think that proves the point that recognised IP can help you build your audience base, and it's no surprise to me that Disney have resurrected shows and movies to help them build on the already incredible success of Disney Plus. So, yeah, I think they do. I think it is an important thing. As these services become completely mainstream, I think, as Carol said earlier in the session, there's going to be a need for a broad span of content types, and a big part of that is what we would all describe as mainstream shows that are recognised.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a powerful weapon to bring in, shows that might not be huge in viewership because they might not even be sort of airing, but have a huge fan base. So, I think this is actually a really, really big shift that's happening, that has happened in music and is happening in video and will happen in games, or has happened in games already as well. And that's essentially the shift of monetizing of consumption and access to content to monetizing the actual fandom. If it's, and I'm sure we'll get to that later on in our panel, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it is something that monetizing fandom is something that's absolutely key to drive growth in entertainment for the next half a decade or so. As access to consumption becomes commoditized, and consumers are learning that the value of access to all music is $9.99, and consumers are learning that the value of access to all videos is $14.99 or $20 or whatever it may be. So the super premium you are only gonna reach if you're gonna be able to tap into consumers' emotions. So, for example, shameless plug for Admedia, one of the things that we do is we track one of the fandom related metrics we track is called the fandom to viewership ratio. So, in short, if your current viewership is larger than your fan base, it means that the show is essentially growing predominantly based on its marketing push. But if there is low viewership and higher degree of fandom, then there is an opportunity to bring that show back and actually get people to pay, not for accessing it because they've already seen it 10 times, they will pay for loving it. And that's a subtle, but sounds like a subtle difference, but I think it makes a world of difference in the way that the business models are going to work going forward.
With so many, one of the things that we talk about in TV, I made a joke about it earlier, but everyone seems to have a streaming service now, and it's or a subscription service as well. And in games, that's actually starting to happen quite a bit. Ubisoft, a lot of the publishers are starting to open their own subscription services. Is there any sign that there's consumer fatigue in this, Carol?
Well, so I would say short answer, no. So I got some data from Q2 2020. We've had 19% of consumers saying they had 3 or more digital subscription, and that's up from 13% the same quarter a year ago. And then we also track consumers who pay for more than one video subscription service, and that's also up from 18 to 28%. So there is nothing to suggest that there is fatigue in terms of subscribing, but you raise a really important point in that I do think there is a growing engagement and value exchange fatigue, which will over time potentially grow into some sort of negative sentiment. So the streaming services offer you lots of reasons to sign up, but they don't give you that many reasons to stay signed forever. And so, in short, I don't think the main problem is with getting people subscribed and with lots of people in the market, being able to get new subscribers. But the main issue is getting them increasingly, preventing churn, really, making sure that they're going to stay around. And that's to Robert's point earlier on. It's really, really important to be able to sort of distinguish somehow. And at the moment, it's really largely being distinguished on content, sort of rather than interface and discovery. And that discovery, I agree, is a really, really big issue, because the more content there is, the less you get entertained. Like, you don't have more than 24 hours in the day. If you used to have Netflix only and you had 2 hours to watch stuff, you are now only watching stuff for hour 40 because you're deciding for 20 minutes what to watch, but you're still paying the same price for the month, right? So technically, to me, that's potentially going to grow into some sort of negative sentiment if it's not addressed.
There is a discussion around sort of the UI, or the user interface. I know that some technology companies are looking at things like using AI. So if you're watching, I think they're looking at things to do with how the viewer watches, what bits the viewer watches. There's also discussions around things like bundling, where subscribers go, oh, I've got all these different subscriptions. I just want that one and that one and that one. I want to put it all together and not have to keep logging into different apps all the time. And there's also a discussion we've had quite a lot on TVB Europe, or I've had a lot anyway, around whether there is actually a business case for the streamers to go, all right, don't pay me for a subscription, pay me for the content that you want to watch. So if I want to watch The West Wing, can you tell I'm a massive West Wing fan? I just see where is it available. Right, well, I'm going to go and pay that streaming service £10 to watch all 7 seasons, because I will watch all 7 seasons, even season 5, which is not so good. And is that could be more of a way that we could see almost the streaming service diversify a little bit, where they literally say, don't pay me a monthly fee, pay me for what you want to watch.
What do you think, Robert? Can we go down that route?
Maybe. I think there's different models to be played out. I mean, obviously, what we haven't talked about is what the major pay TV platforms are going to do in terms of how they've begun to aggregate all of these services onto their platforms. And there's a number of different models and how they've done that across Europe. I mean, in Norway, for instance, is a model very similar to what Jenny has got. One of the pay TV platforms offers a sort of buy as you use concept. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there. And I think for some people, clearly you've got generational points at play here too, from a demographic point of view, in terms of how people interact with these services, how they want to interact. And there will be a fairly large proportion of the population who do want an aggregated approach that makes it easy, in inverted commas, to consume the content. So I think you'll see multiple models for delivery grow up over time, and a bit of experimentation. Let's not forget, all the major Hollywood studios will have global streaming services by the end of this year. One to watch out, to look for, I would guess, is Peacock from Universal, because NBC, because that's an ad-funded service. It'd be interesting to see how that does too.
We've got tons of questions. I think all of them link to discoverability most people will sign up for the big exclusives or the older content they know, but how can service providers help to surface the full extent of their catalogue and any hidden gems? We've also got a question about with the competition for attention on a streaming platform, perhaps reduce the overall quality, particularly in games. That question is related to how much of an issue has discoverability become as a result of subscriptions? Robert, you've probably experienced this firsthand.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more of an issue as more services launch. And I haven't got any stats on it, but anecdotally, we all know how we use the services. And as we've discussed earlier in this call, that it's hard to know what's out there. So I think that discoverability is a major issue, and we're using our peer group, using people like influencers online that are driving a lot of activity too. There's multiple routes to get to it, but nonetheless, with that much content, it is hard. I mean, funny enough, I looked at Amazon Prime for the first time for a week yesterday, and I was, there's tons of new content I've never heard of, and it's hard to discern what's good, what's bad, and that's just a small microcosm of the issue. So I think there's something to be done there, and it's whether the pay TV model of aggregation becomes more of an impact than we currently think, maybe.
There is such a lot of work going on in the back, what we call the back end of streaming services, with various vendors all working on the user, what's being served to the user. And we've got some companies that are looking at actually, they call you tribes, and they will serve you what they think your tribe will want to watch. So for me, it'll be, I don't know, the American president and anything to do with Liverpool Football Club and blah, blah, blah. In order to make it much easier for me to find what I want. One of the things that we haven't talked about is actually things that aren't the streamers themselves that tell us what's available. So I actually use an app on my phone called, I don't know if I should say what it's called, but it tells me every day what's new on the streaming services that I subscribe to. So I can, and it's a long thing that I have to scroll through. So I've still got to do all the scrolling, but it does go, I will go, oh, that's gone on to Amazon, or that's just gone on to Disney. Oh, brilliant. Well, I can put that into, I need to remember that that's what I want to find, or what I want to watch. And I find I spend a lot less time because of that, scrolling through Netflix or whatever, trying to find something to watch, because I know that some of the platforms aren't great at telling you what's new on their service. Then, I would argue something like Amazon isn't probably as good at that as somebody like Netflix is. Certainly I feel like that way. It's serving up that content to me. So I will often miss something on Amazon, not realising that it's there, and then weeks later it will suddenly pop up in the menu from somewhere. The algorithm will have told it, oh yeah, serve her that because she's watched that. So there's lots of, I do know there's a lot of work, a really big piece of work going on within the technology industry at the moment about making content as discoverable as possible to viewers.
Harold, do you have anything to add?
No, completely agree. Discoverability will be key, and generally, any issues with the interface, anything that can remove friction. So whether it's you as a consumer having to switch an app or a window or click somewhere else, all of these, if you can remove 2 clicks from a process, that's worth many, many millions of dollars. And yeah, so to me, that's the next stage after the attention economy has peaked, as we sort of spoke about a lot, is essentially going to be the age of decluttering. Because once you've got access to everything, what is the next value that you can get as a consumer? Is to get the right stuff at the right time with an improved likelihood that you're going to actually be happy about what you've been served, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about games for a little bit. What I'm going to do is there's a lot of assumptions in the video games industry about how Game Pass and stuff is going to affect video games going forward, and some of that assumption, I know video games is a little different to TV and film. We've got consoles and stuff, and there's a barrier to entries in some ways. But one of the things the games industry is optimistic about is that that maybe this gives a rise to, because mid-tier and small-tier companies are sort of they struggle, not so much the indies, but the mid-tier studios have struggled a little bit in the past in video games. With the next, but the optimism is that now that they're going to be able to find an audience now that they perhaps couldn't find before. People couldn't justify the $60 price tag on box video games. Is that something you've seen in TV and film? Have mid-tier productions and stuff like that been able to find a bigger audience as a result of subs?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot today about the big streamers, but there are much more streaming services out there. If you look at things like, Shudder or Curzon or BFI Player, they are, that's where smaller films, indie films, are finding an outlet. Look at what's happening in sports. There are streaming services. I mean, streaming services out there that cover everything. And because there's a market there for everything. But you've got sports out there. DAZN do baseball. No, not baseball, basketball. You've got Broadway HD that look after theatre. I mean, there's even a streaming channel out there for your dog if you want it. So there's lots of opportunity, I think, for smaller companies who are producing content that aren't maybe one of the really huge powerhouse production companies to find somewhere that will want the content that they're producing. And I think that could very easily cross over for gaming.
Carol, Rob, anything to add?
Well, I think with the major streaming platforms of video and TV taking 80% of the viewing, I think it is in the US, there's still 20%, which is a huge market for some of the services like Jenny talks about, particularly in sort of niche pursuits, in pursuits or more targeted like sports. I think there's still plenty of opportunity. That does bring with it the opportunity for smaller producers to be really successful. So yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity.
Another thing that the games industry is optimistic about is I'm not so sure about this. Xbox say that Game Pass is helping the physical market or the download market sell more products. The idea is that partly because there's consoles involved. There's a great example from about 5 years ago where a game called Rocket League came into PlayStation Plus, the subscription service. Many millions of people played it, loved it. That became a social phenomenon. Then people bought it on the other platforms, and it actually resulted in a spike in sales for that game. Xbox claim the same thing's happening so far on Game Pass. Is that, looking at what happened in film and TV, I think, Robert, you've probably got views on this. Is that something that is going to keep happening, or are we going to get to a tipping point where those markets are going to struggle?
I think that was the argument made about home entertainment in film and TV. And at the start, it did play out a bit, but as time went on, inevitably it didn't. And that's why you've seen the business models in film and TV to change so dramatically. So, that argument was made when content was licensed at the start of Netflix by major producers to Netflix, that it would help overall sales of that content. Initially, it did a bit. Over time, it didn't. And that's, the net result of that is the massive dramatic change, which was it was always going to happen, but, has happened, and that effect definitely dissipated.
Wasn't it just this week, actually, Disney have said they're not doing any more 4K Blu-rays of their live-action content?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't blame them. From a physical media point of view, the world has moved on.
Carol, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to approach it from a slightly different angle, like when you say sort of, you mentioned Game Pass and the example with Rocket League. I think it's important, there's going to be a lot of companies driving a lot of different narratives as this transformation transpires. And that's very natural just because every company has got a slightly different end game. So whenever companies drive a narrative in the industry that's transforming, I always kind of try to remind myself of, what the key goals and the end games are, not of the brand, but of the parent companies. And so, when you look at it that way, it kind of makes sense. If you're it would make very much sense that that Xbox would take that and push that narrative. If your business is built on an ecosystem play across many industries and verticals, you don't really have to care as much about the game's unit economics because you can drive value from elsewhere. If you're using entertainment to draw sort of you're using it to drive as large a number of people as possible. So for somebody like Xbox, it makes sense that what they need is the as many people as possible argument. But at the same time, we know that ARPUs will go down. Users will go up. But then on the other hand, if you're somebody, like Take-Two, however, it makes sense you wouldn't want to push that kind of narrative, and you wouldn't want to be a champion of streaming. in games, because you know it's potentially going to dilute your ARPU, and because you're a games pure play company, there is nowhere else to draw that value from. So you're, you know, if you're a pure play games company, is going to think about this very, very differently, and rightly so, from an ecosystem tech major play. Yeah, that was what I wanted to add.
Are there players in film, Robert, TV, where content creators, where there's sort of, who don't benefit at all from the business model of streaming doesn't work for them?
No, I don't think so. I think if I was a production business, I'd be embracing both. I'd be embracing all of the models. And I think that's sort of where the Take-Two example plays out. Yeah, I think there's a room for blockbuster video games that you have to have and you have to play through, and you buy 3 a year at 60, 70 quid, or you subscribe every month to them. And also a streaming service is, which has got lower barrier to entry, less financial consequence, but it'll give you multiple different types of content. So for me, I think that they can coexist. Inevitably, you're going to have, probably over time, less of the 60, 70 big games and more on streaming, I would argue. But that's sort of the case already, because the market is quite polarised in games already, isn't it, towards the top titles in terms of sales volumes. And then the other factor is, for games, it's like what people, like for instance, what happens with something like Fortnite, which is expanding its remit beyond being just a game, becoming a universe or meta-universe, or what you want to call it. It brings with it multiple opportunities there for that to become almost like a platform for entertainment too.
Is that something you agree with, Carol and Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of. I think, it always depends on who you ask with the whole, like, is streaming and game streaming going to help or not? I think personally it's going to be great for consumers. I think it's going to be great for platforms and ecosystem plays. I don't think it's going to be as great in the long term for pure play games publishers. Unless they start venturing out across entertainment and diversifying outward.
The idea of the diversifying is interesting. I mean, have we seen that with the streamers? I'm not sure that we have in terms of TV and film. I think, as a viewer, we want as much content to watch when we want and how we want. And I guess as a gamer, that's the same thing. You want to be able to play games when you want to, how you want to, however. And if the gaming industry wants to look at anything, I think, from TV and film and subscriptions, that's the way to look at it. But, this thing is now the king, really.
We do have some good questions in the chat, but we have run out of time. So I'm going to ask one question to end it all, which will hopefully encompass everyone's questions. It's a nice broad one. Overall, have subscriptions been a benefit to the world of TV and film, or has it harmed the business in any way?
Depends who you ask. If you ask the BBC, I think they might say, oh, well, if you ask Netflix, they're going to say, no, it's brilliant, we love it. If you ask a production company, like Robert said, they're going to say, hey, we can offer content to both of them. So as a viewer, I'm going to say, brilliant, give me more content. I can't find anything I watch on my telly, or on my normal telly, as I call it. I'm going to go and I'm going to go and see what I can't find to watch on my streamer now.
Yeah. I think it's changed the industry in beyond all recognition, and it's done it relatively fast. The business models that exist in film, for instance, have been in place for 80 odd years and were blown apart in 6. So I think, but people are consuming more content. The models, the streamers are growing exponentially. When will they hit 1 billion subscribers? I can't see it be that far away. And in the long term, they will deliver huge financial returns, which is why you see things like the Netflix share price so high, because the belief is they will deliver massive returns as time goes on. So for me, it was an inevitable consequence of the world we live in, the digital technology revolution, and it will end up being highly profitable, I believe.
You agree, Carol?
Yeah, I think, well, my sort of mantra during the pandemic times for a lot of the companies I work with has been about kind of trying to bounce forward instead of trying to bounce back. And there is a really good timing because everybody is equally disrupted. Well, not equally, but everybody is disrupted to a degree. It's a really, really, really good timing to do all the self-disruptive things you may have been thinking about in your company, but the timing wasn't right. So if you're trying, I would say the one thing to take away is as we progress towards streaming in gaming, there will be companies that will want to stay purely in their traditional model, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with running a profitable business in a declining market. There is nothing wrong with that at all, and can actually be more profitable sometimes than in a growing market. But if you're going to try to go and expand and build for this sort of new world and for the new consumer behaviors, I would argue it is easier to start building with all that in mind first than trying to essentially take the new world and retrofit it into your old infrastructure. That almost never works. So to me, that is kind of like the parting message, to take home, and along with sort of monetizing fandom over consumption. The one thing a colleague of mine, Mark Mulligan, actually told me a nice analogy the other day, that that the shift from sort of retail and into streaming is kind of like you were selling a car or an engine, and the game used to be the engine, but now the game has become the fuel. And so because you're selling the subscription service, not the game itself anymore. So that carries a lot of implications, not only with the fact that if you used to sell a premium product that was an engine and it turned into fuel, your product is now a commodity. Again, a lot tougher to make profit out of commodities. So again, coming back to the sort of fandom and bouncing forward is my parting message.
Well, thank you all very much. We are well over time, and thank you for staying on. So thank you, Robert, Jenny, and Carol, for your insight. And thank you to everyone who asked questions, and thank you all for watching. We will be back after a break at about 3 p.m. UK time for more talks from big names, beginning on a session about how video games that use TV and film techniques. We've got Sam Barlow in that talk. That's at 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific time. I'll be back on at 9 p.m. to talk about the hunt for the next Witcher. And after that, I hope we can all meet face to face and on a special networking Zoom event. If you've registered for a ticket, you will have all your login details already. If you haven't, then you can still register for a ticket, even though you're watching it now. Just go on our Eventbrite page because you can still register. I hope to see you all then, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.